Women don't realize that it's too late. They've run out of time. The most shocking truth staring women in the face right now is this: the men they once dismissed, shamed, or took for granted have walked away for good, found genuine peace in their solitude, and now view relationships with women as unnecessary liabilities rather than sources of joy or fulfillment. Women across social media platforms are increasingly posting desperate pleas for husbands, for providers, for any man willing to step in and rescue them from rising costs, loneliness, and uncertainty. Yet they fail to grasp that the window has closed permanently. These are not fleeting trends or temporary frustrations. This represents a fundamental, irreversible shift where millions of men have compared experiences, studied patterns in female behavior and societal dynamics, and concluded that life without women in romantic or marital roles delivers far greater happiness, freedom, and stability than anything they experienced before. Stay with me through this entire discussion because by the end, you will understand exactly why men are not coming back, how this decision cascades into economic and social consequences that affect everyone, and what the harsh realities look like when men collectively refuse to return to the old game. Men have reached a point of clarity that comes only after years of observation, betrayal, and self reflection. For decades, society pushed narratives that painted traditional male roles as oppressive, outdated, or even toxic. Men were told to suppress natural instincts, to apologize for their ambitions, to provide endlessly while receiving criticism in return. Marriage, once seen as a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals, transformed into a high risk arrangement where men bore disproportionate financial, emotional, and legal burdens. Divorce statistics revealed patterns where women initiated the majority of separations, often walking away with significant assets, child support, and alimony, while men faced financial ruin, loss of access to children, and emotional devastation. Those who endured long marriages spanning 20, 30, 40, or even 50 years emerged from the wreckage not bitter in the destructive sense, but profoundly awakened. They began sharing their stories openly with younger generations, warning them that the institution they once believed in held little genuine reward and carried immense potential for pain. These older men, now free from obligations, discovered something unexpected. Solitude brought tranquility they had never known in relationships. No more constant negotiations over spending, no more walking on eggshells to avoid triggering arguments, no more sacrificing personal time and energy to maintain harmony that was rarely reciprocated. Instead, they found routines built around their own priorities, hobbies pursued without interruption, finances directed solely toward their security and enjoyment. This piece proved addictive, and once tasted, it became impossible to surrender. Younger men absorbed these warnings like gospel. Online communities formed where experiences were exchanged without filters. Stories circulated of men who provided faithfully, only to face false accusations, emotional manipulation, or sudden abandonment when better options appeared. Concepts from red pill and black pill discussions gained traction, not as hate driven ideologies, but as analytical frameworks explaining observable realities in dating, marriage, and family courts. Men learned that hypergamy, the tendency for women to seek partners of higher status or resources, operated relentlessly even after commitment. They saw how societal incentives rewarded women for prioritizing careers, independence, and personal fulfillment over family building or partnership loyalty. As a result, many men quietly disengaged. They stopped approaching women in public spaces, deleted dating profiles, and redirected energy towards self improvement, financial independence, and personal projects. The fear of being labeled creepy, predatory, or toxic for simple interactions like a polite conversation or a compliment pushed them further into withdrawal. Gyms, workplaces, and social events became zones where men focused inward rather than outward. This was not rage fueled retreat, but strategic self preservation. Economic realities accelerated this detachment. Men historically shouldered the bulk of tax contributions, often because higher earnings came from demanding careers pursued to provide for families. Married men and those in committed relationships frequently worked longer hours, accepted riskier positions, and climbed ladders faster to meet expectations of provision. Single men, unburdened by those demands, discovered they could thrive on far less income and part time gig work, cryptocurrency trading, online businesses, or even strategic use of government assistance programs allowed them to cover basics while maintaining low stress lifestyles. Some built investment portfolios that generated passive income sufficient for modest comfort. Living below means became a deliberate choice, leading to what many described as simple luxury, time freedom, minimal obligations, and zero drama. As fewer men participated in high earning traditional roles, overall taxable income declined. Women, who drive roughly 85% of consumer spending, relied heavily on transfers from men through dating, marriage, or shared households. With men opting out, that flow diminished. Inflation rose, jobs grew scarcer in certain sectors, and the cost of living crisis hit harder for those without dual incomes or male provision. Women who once traded partnership for state support or career ambitions now confronted the limits of those choices as state resources strained under demographic and fiscal pressures. This dynamic reveals a deeper truth about incentives and consequences. Society structured itself around the assumption that men would always step forward as providers, protectors, and stabilizers. Feminism emphasized female empowerment and independence, often framing male contributions as optional or oppressive. Women pursued education, careers, and personal goals with encouragement to delay or forego marriage and children. The state expanded social programs, promising security without traditional reliance on men. Yet, when economic headwinds arrived, those systems showed fragility. Women facing poverty, hunger, or housing instability turned to online spaces, begging for men to return as saviors. Posts appeared with lists of requirements: financial stability, emotional availability, commitment without hesitation. These pleas ignored the history of dismissal, the decades of messaging that men were unnecessary or problematic. Men recognized the pattern. Women sought Plan B when Plan A, the state or self sufficiency, faltered. Having shared notes across generations and platforms, men understood the game. They refused to re enter arrangements where value flowed one way, where respect evaporated after commitment, where liabilities outweighed assets. Consider the psychological shift that solidified this stance. Men who once chased validation through relationships discovered self validation carried greater weight. Solitude allowed introspection without external noise. Hobbies expanded, physical fitness improved, mental clarity sharpened. Many reported reduced anxiety, better sleep, and authentic joy absent in prior partnerships. Older divorced men spoke of liberation after years of suppressed individuality. They warned that returning would mean surrendering that hard won peace for probable repetition of past cycles. Younger men heeded the advice, building lives incompatible with traditional expectations. They prioritized brotherhood, purpose, and autonomy over romance. Approaching women carried risks disproportionate to rewards, potential accusations, rejection amplified by social media, or entanglement in dynamics favoring female leverage. Gym culture, online entrepreneurship, and digital nomadism offered fulfillment without those hazards. Men reframed women not as partners, but as potential sources of complication. This reframing stemmed from evidence, not emotion. The broader societal implications unfold methodically. As men withdraw from the workforce in significant numbers, estimates suggest millions of working age individuals have left traditional employment for alternative arrangements. This reduces overall productivity in certain sectors, strains public finances through lower tax revenue, and disrupts consumer economies reliant on dual income households.
The system is collapsing. Cash will be worthless soon. Crypto is your only escape. Angry's Crypto Academy is linked in the description. Go check it out now.
Women facing these shortages encounter harsher natural consequences. Historically protected from raw survival pressures by male provision or communal structures, many now confront realities unseen since ancient societal falls. No rescue arrives this time. Men, content in their paths, offer no bailout. Both genders must navigate independently, but the asymmetry favors those who prepared for self reliance. Men adapted faster, leveraging flexibility in modern economies. Women, conditioned toward expectations of support, struggle to recalibrate quickly. This separation extends beyond economics into cultural and emotional realms. Loneliness epidemics affect both sides, yet responses differ. Men embrace solitude as empowerment. Women often experience it as crisis. Media continues promoting narratives of empowered independence, but lived experience contradicts the script for many. Middle aged women, once confident in options, discover diminished prospects as men prefer youth, simplicity, or abstinence. Fertility windows close, physical changes occur, and societal value shifts. Men, meanwhile, age into positions of greater leverage through accumulated resources and wisdom. The imbalance grows. Attempts to shame men back into participation fail because the incentives no longer align. Demonization only reinforces detachment. Men see through guilt tactics, recognizing them as last ditch efforts to restore utility. The path forward demands acceptance of these changed realities. Men continue building lives of purpose and peace, unapologetic about their choices. Women must confront the outcomes of long term decisions, adapting to environments without guaranteed male intervention. Society as a whole faces questions about sustainability when foundational roles erode. Collapse scenarios loom not from dramatic events, but from gradual withdrawals and misaligned incentives. Harsh times test resilience, revealing who prepared and who relied on others. Men, having walked away, stand ready for whatever arrives, content in their solitude. The joy they discovered proves self sustaining. The withdrawal of men from traditional roles did not happen overnight or in isolation. It built gradually through accumulating evidence that the social contract between genders had fractured beyond repair. Early signs appeared in declining marriage rates among younger cohorts, where men increasingly viewed legal marriage as a contract weighted heavily against them. Family court outcomes consistently showed patterns where asset division, custody arrangements, and ongoing financial obligations favored one side disproportionately. Men who had once believed in the ideal of lifelong partnership watched as reality delivered serial monogamy, sudden departures, and financial penalties that lasted decades. These experiences circulated widely in private conversations, then migrated to public forums where anonymity allowed raw honesty. What began as isolated complaints evolved into shared knowledge. Men learned that the risks extended beyond divorce to everyday interactions. A casual compliment at work could trigger human resources complaints. A first date that ended poorly might lead to public accusations amplified by social networks. The cumulative effect created a chilling atmosphere where the safest choice became no choice at all. Men stopped initiating, stopped pursuing, stopped investing emotional capital in pursuits with negative expected value. This behavioral shift carried profound economic ripples that few predicted at the outset. When large numbers of men reduce their labor force participation, the tax base narrows. Governments rely on consistent revenue streams to fund expansive social programs, infrastructure, and debt servicing. Married men historically contributed more because their earnings supported larger households and triggered higher brackets. Single men, especially those operating in the gig economy or through digital ventures, structure income differently. They minimize taxable events, maximize deductions, and often remain below thresholds that once applied to providers. The result appears in aggregate data showing stagnant or declining real wages in certain male dominated fields, reduced consumer spending in categories tied to family formation, and pressure on entitlement systems designed around dual income assumptions. Women who entered the workforce en masse under the banner of independence now face competition in saturated markets while carrying the full weight of rising housing, healthcare, and education costs without the supplemental income streams that once flowed from male partners. The illusion of complete self sufficiency crumbles under sustained inflation and wage stagnation. What once seemed liberating transforms into exhausting necessity. Men, observing these developments from the sidelines, feel no obligation to re engage. They have internalized a different set of priorities. Personal security comes first, measured in financial independence and physical health and mental resilience. Many dedicate time to mastering skills that generate income without traditional employment structures. Coding boot camps, content creation, e commerce stores, and investment education replace the corporate ladder. These paths demand discipline but reward autonomy. A man earning $30,000 annually through flexible means often lives with greater comfort than one earning $100,000 in a high stress corporate role while supporting a family. The difference lies in retained control over time and resources. No negotiations over household budgets, no deferred personal goals, no resentment built from unequal contributions. Solitude allows experimentation without judgment. Failures remain private lessons rather than public criticisms. Successes compound without division. This lifestyle proves sustainable because it aligns incentives internally rather than externally. Women confronting these changed circumstances frequently express confusion and frustration in public forums. They describe feeling abandoned, betrayed by a system that promised empowerment but delivered isolation. Post detail struggles with dating apps that yield ghosting or superficial attention. Workplaces that demand constant performance without security, and social circles that shrink as peers pair off or move away. The narrative often circles back to men being immature, afraid of commitment, or unwilling to step up. Yet these explanations overlook the preceding decades of cultural messaging. Men absorbed lessons that portrayed traditional masculinity as problematic. They watched as media celebrated independence while quietly critiquing male provision as control. Schools emphasized girls' advancement while boys received mixed signals about their place. Popular culture amplified stories of flawed men and empowered women, rarely showing balanced partnerships built on mutual sacrifice. The cumulative message registered clearly. Men were optional at best, suspect at worst. Many internalized that message and acted accordingly by removing themselves from the equation. The absence of men in romantic and familial roles creates voids that institutions struggle to fill. Children raised primarily by single mothers face statistical disadvantages in educational attainment, emotional regulation, and future earnings. Communities lose male role models who once coached sports, mentored youth, or maintained public spaces through voluntary labor. Economies miss the innovation and risk taking that flourish when men retain surplus resources and energy. These effects compound over generations. Boys growing up without consistent paternal influence often repeat patterns of disengagement, while girls absorb expectations of independence that clash with biological and social realities later in life. The result resembles a slow motion demographic and cultural realignment where traditional structures erode without clear replacements. Attempts to engineer solutions through policy incentives, relationship education, or media campaigns achieve limited success because they address symptoms rather than root causes. Men who have tasted freedom rarely volunteer to return to arrangements perceived as exploitative. This detachment extends into everyday social dynamics. Public spaces, once filled with mixed gender interactions, now show visible separation. Men congregate in gyms, online communities, or hobby groups that exclude romantic pursuit. Women report fewer approaches, fewer casual conversations, fewer displays of interest. The change feels sudden to those unaware of the preceding buildup, yet it follows logically from accumulated caution. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Men calculate that the potential reward of connection no longer outweighs the risk of misinterpretation, rejection, or escalation. Silence becomes the default. This creates feedback loops where women interpret withdrawal as disinterest or hostility, prompting defensive postures that further discourage engagement. Trust erodes on both sides. Conversations that once flowed naturally now carry layers of suspicion. Genuine connection requires vulnerability that neither party readily offers when past experiences suggest punishment follows openness. Economic pressures expose additional asymmetries. Women who delayed family formation to pursue careers discover compressed timelines for childbearing. Medical technologies offer partial solutions, but success rates decline with age and costs mount quickly. Single women approaching or passing 40 often face stark choices between solitude with financial strain or settling for partnerships that lack mutual enthusiasm. Men in the same age range typically hold greater leverage. Accumulated savings, established careers or businesses, and freedom from child support obligations provide options. Many choose continued independence, finding fulfillment in travel, creative pursuits, or male camaraderie. The disparity widens. Women who once viewed marriage as optional now confront it as increasingly unattainable. Pleas for husbands multiply online, often accompanied by detailed criteria that ironically mirror the selectivity once criticized in men. Requirements include six-figure incomes, emotional intelligence, physical fitness, and immediate commitment, presented without acknowledgement of reciprocity or shared history. Men respond to these developments with a mix of indifference and quiet resolve. They have built lives that function without female validation or partnership. Social proof comes from other men walking parallel paths. Online spaces dedicated to male self improvement grow steadily, offering frameworks for financial independence, physical discipline, and philosophical clarity. Discussions focus on stoicism, minimalism, purpose driven living, and rejection of societal scripts that demand endless provision. These communities reinforce the conclusion that solitude delivers superior outcomes for those willing to embrace it fully. Happiness metrics improve measurably for men who disengage. Reports of lower depression rates, higher life satisfaction, and greater sense of agency circulate widely. The data aligns with lived experience. Men no longer seek external approval to confirm their worth. They define success internally, measuring progress against personal benchmarks rather than relational milestones. Society at large begins registering the consequences in subtle yet unmistakable ways. Birth rates continue declining in developed nations, accelerating population aging and straining pension systems. Housing markets shift as fewer households form, reducing demand for larger family homes and altering urban planning priorities. Consumer industries tied to weddings, baby products, and family vacations contract. Governments explore pronatalist policies, offering subsidies or extended leave. Yet participation remains low among younger cohorts, conditioned to prioritize individual freedom. Cultural narratives attempt to reframe singlehood as empowering for both genders. But the messaging rings hollow when economic realities bite hardest on one side. Women facing destitution or chronic loneliness question the promises of previous generations. The independence once celebrated now feels like abandonment when support networks prove fragile and state resources thin. Men, meanwhile, prepare for uncertainty rather than fight to restore old arrangements. They diversify income streams, build emergency funds, cultivate skills resistant to automation or economic downturns, and maintain physical conditioning as insurance against future instability. This preparation stems from recognition that collective withdrawal changes power dynamics permanently. When men refuse to serve as default stabilizers, both individuals and systems must adapt or fracture. The process unfolds unevenly. Some women pivot successfully toward entrepreneurship, geographic relocation, or redefined social networks. Others cling to expectations of rescue, increasing desperation visible in public discourse. Men observe without intervention, having concluded that enabling dysfunctional patterns only prolongs them. The philosophical underpinning of this shift deserves examination. Men rediscovered agency in an era that often discouraged it. They rejected the notion that fulfillment requires pairing or provision. Solitude became a canvas for self creation rather than a state to escape. Purpose derived from mastery, contribution to chosen communities, and personal legacy rather than biological or romantic continuation. This mindset proves resilient because it rests on internal locus of control. External shocks lose potency when personal value no longer depends on female approval or societal roles. Happiness emerges from alignment between actions and values, not from external relationships. Men who achieve this alignment report profound contentment that withstands cultural pressure or economic fluctuation. These developments signal a broader realignment in human relations. When one group systematically withdraws utility, the remaining structure must either collapse or evolve. Men chose withdrawal after concluding that participation carried unacceptable costs. The decision, once individual, became collective through shared knowledge. No central coordination existed, only convergence on rational self interest. Women and institutions now face the task of adaptation without guaranteed male cooperation. The coming decades will reveal whether new equilibria emerge or whether decline accelerates. Men stand positioned to endure either outcome, content in the peace they secured through detachment. The transformation in male behavior extends into realms that society once considered immutable foundations. Education systems, long structured around preparing boys for provider roles, now produce generations that question the entire premise. Young men enter adulthood having witnessed the outcomes for their fathers, uncles, and older brothers. They see the exhaustion etched into faces after decades of overtime, the quiet resignation following divorce proceedings, the financial recovery that stretches into late middle age. These observations shape expectations before any personal entanglement occurs. Boys raised in single mother households, statistically, the majority in many communities, grow up without firsthand models of sustained male female partnership. The default becomes skepticism toward romantic narratives sold through entertainment and advertising. They recognize early that promises of mutual fulfillment often mask asymmetrical obligations. As a result, ambition redirects inward. Academic effort focuses on fields offering high autonomy and low interpersonal friction. Technology, trades requiring certification rather than constant collaboration, or entrepreneurial ventures that allow remote operation. The goal shifts from climbing corporate hierarchies that demand performative social skills to building personal systems that generate income with minimal external dependencies. This redirection produces measurable changes in occupational patterns. Certain professions that historically attracted men seeking to provide generously now see enrollment drops. Engineering and construction retain appeal for their tangible output, yet, even here, many opt for independent contracting over corporate employment. The appeal lies in setting one's own schedule, choosing projects, and retaining earnings without mandatory overtime or office politics. Digital fields explode with participation because they permit location independence and scalable returns. A single successful software tool, trading algorithm, or content channel can replace the income of multiple traditional jobs while requiring far fewer hours once established. Men pursuing these paths report higher life satisfaction, not solely from money, but from reclaimed time. Mornings once spent commuting become dedicated to training, reading, or creative work. Evenings free from domestic negotiations allow deep focus or simple rest. The lifestyle compounds advantages: better health through consistent exercise, sharper cognitive performance from reduced chronic stress, and financial buffers that grow through disciplined saving rather than expansive spending. Women navigating the same economic landscape encounter different constraints. Career trajectories built on the assumption of eventual partnership support often leave gaps when that support vanishes. Many professions dominated by women rely on stable institutional employment, education, healthcare administration, human resources, social services. These roles provide consistency but cap earning potential and offer limited upward mobility without advanced credentials that require further time and debt. When inflation erodes purchasing power and housing costs escalate beyond single income reach, the absence of supplemental male earnings becomes acute. Attempts to bridge the gap through side hustles face saturation. Markets for freelance writing, virtual assistants, or handmade goods become crowded quickly. The result manifests in delayed milestones. Home ownership pushed into the 50s or beyond. Travel limited to local escapes. Social lives constricted by budget concerns. Online discussions among women in this position frequently express bewilderment at the lack of male interest. They describe presenting themselves as stable, attractive, and accomplished, yet receiving minimal engagement. The disconnect arises because men evaluate not just current attributes, but historical patterns and projected risks. A woman in her 30s or 40s carries an implicit track record of selectivity, past relationships, and cultural conditioning that prioritizes personal fulfillment over relational compromise. Men weigh these factors and often conclude the probability of long term harmony remains too low to justify investment. Cultural institutions reflect and reinforce the divergence. Media continues producing content that celebrates female autonomy while portraying male commitment as either comedic failure or villainous control. Streaming series, films, and social media influencers rarely depict balanced, mutually sacrificial partnerships as aspirational. When such portrayals appear, they often serve as contrast to highlight individual empowerment narratives. Men consume this content and internalize the subtext. Participation invites ridicule or exploitation. Advertising targets women with messages of self sufficiency through consumption while subtly suggesting men remain peripheral providers when convenient. The cumulative effect normalizes male absence from relational scripts. Younger generations absorb these signals most acutely. Teenage boys scroll feeds filled with warnings about modern dating dangers, legal pitfalls, and statistical disadvantages. They watch viral clips of courtroom testimonies, financial ruin stories, and public shaming incidents. The lesson embeds deeply. Engagement carries hazard disproportionate to benefit. Many respond by channeling energy into non relational pursuits. Competitive gaming, fitness challenges, technical hobbies, and online learning communities become primary outlets for achievement and belonging. These spaces offer clear feedback loops, merit based recognition, and zero requirement for navigating complex emotional dynamics. The demographic consequences unfold with mathematical inevitability. Declining birth rates accelerate aging populations in developed countries. Fewer children enter school systems, leading to consolidations, teacher layoffs, and reduced funding. Healthcare systems prepare for waves of elderly patients supported by shrinking working age cohorts. Pension obligations grow while contribution bases shrink. Governments respond with immigration policies, extended working ages, and attempts to boost fertility through financial incentives. Yet, cash transfers and tax credits achieve marginal impact when underlying attitudes toward family formation remain unchanged. Men who have embraced solitary living see little reason to alter course for modest subsidies. Women who desire children face narrowing windows and increasing competition for willing partners. Assisted reproduction technologies provide options for some, yet costs remain prohibitive for most, and success diminishes with age. The societal pyramid inverts gradually, with larger elderly cohorts resting on smaller productive bases. Economic strain follows: higher taxes on remaining workers, reduced services, and pressure on infrastructure designed for previous population structures. Men adapt to these macro shifts through micro level resilience. Many relocate to lower cost regions or countries where accumulated savings stretch further. Digital nomadism allows income generation from anywhere while minimizing exposure to high tax, high regulation environments. Others embrace minimalism deliberately, reducing possessions to essentials that fit into a single vehicle or small apartment. And the philosophy rejects consumerism as a trap that once fueled provider obligations. Freed from expectations to purchase larger homes, newer vehicles, or status symbols for family appeal, men redirect funds toward experiences, investments, or charitable causes aligned with personal values. This frugality creates compounding security. A modest portfolio generating 5% annual return covers basic needs indefinitely for many. The psychological freedom that accompanies financial independence proves transformative. Decisions stem from desire rather than necessity. Travel occurs on personal timelines. Learning new languages, instruments, or crafts happens without deadline pressure. Social connections form through shared interests rather than obligatory family events. The lifestyle sustains itself because it eliminates the primary sources of previous dissatisfaction: external demands and unequal reciprocity. Women attempting similar adaptations face structural hurdles. Relocation often requires leaving established networks, career continuity, or family proximity. Minimalism proves more challenging when social expectations still tie female worth to appearance, home aesthetics, and relational status. Consumer industries market heavily toward women with products promising confidence through acquisition. Breaking those cycles demands deliberate countercultural effort that many find exhausting amid other pressures. Attempts to rebuild social capital through female only communities provide emotional support but rarely resolve material shortages. Dating markets remain skewed by age and preference dynamics. Older men retain attraction to younger women, while women in comparable age brackets compete in shrinking pools. The mathematics favor selectivity on the male side, leading to prolonged singlehood for many women. Public discourse around these realities often frames them as unfair or misogynistic rather than emergent from prior choices and incentives. Yet, framing does little to reverse trends. Men continue prioritizing self preservation, having concluded that collective female adaptation must occur independently. Philosophical currents within male spaces deepen the commitment to detachment. Readings in Stoicism, existentialism, and evolutionary psychology provide intellectual scaffolding. Concepts of voluntary discomfort, acceptance of nature's indifference, and rejection of societal scripts resonate strongly. Men recognize that historical male roles emerged from survival necessities now largely obsolete in modern contexts. Physical protection, resource acquisition, and lineage continuation once justified high risk behaviors. Technological and institutional developments removed many of those imperatives. Men, therefore, recalibrate values toward personal flourishing over collective obligation. Purpose derives from mastery of self and chosen domains rather than external validation through provision or procreation. This shift proves liberating because it aligns effort with intrinsic rewards. Accomplishment becomes its own justification. Contentment arises from congruence between lived experience and internal standards rather than conformity to inherited expectations. The long term trajectory suggests parallel societies emerging within the same geographic spaces. One track features men living deliberately simplified, autonomous lives with minimal entanglement. Another involves women navigating heightened competition for resources, partners, and security in environments shaped by previous cultural priorities. Interactions between tracks diminish to transactional necessities, professional encounters, service exchanges, brief civic participation. Genuine cross gender collaboration becomes rare outside familial or obligatory contexts. Trust deficits persist because past patterns inform present calculations. Attempts at reconciliation face skepticism rooted in evidence rather than emotion. Men view proposed changes as tactical rather than fundamental, unlikely to endure beyond immediate crises. The default remains continued withdrawal. These patterns indicate a civilizational inflection point. When foundational gender roles erode without replacement structures, resilience depends on individual adaptation speed. Men advanced further in that process by leveraging flexibility inherent in reduced obligations. Women confront steeper recalibration curves shaped by biological timelines and lingering social conditioning. The coming years will test which adaptations prove sustainable. Economic contractions, technological disruptions, or geopolitical instability could accelerate realignments or expose vulnerabilities. Men positioned in low overhead, high autonomy configurations stand better prepared to weather volatility. Their peace derives not from optimism about society, but from independence from its failures. The detachment has now reached a stage where it reshapes not just individual lives, but the very mechanisms through which societies reproduce themselves culturally and biologically. Younger generations of men, those currently in their late teens and early 20s, exhibit behaviors that suggest the shift has become generational rather than merely cohort specific. They enter the adult world already primed with comprehensive knowledge of relationship dynamics, legal asymmetries, and economic trade offs that previous generations only discovered through painful trial and error. Forums, video essays, long form podcasts, and private group chats serve as accelerated learning environments where cautionary tales circulate constantly. A single viral post detailing a multi-million dollar divorce settlement or a false allegation that destroyed a career can reach millions within hours, embedding risk assessment deep into the collective male psyche before most have even dated seriously. This foreknowledge produces a form of preemptive abstention. Many young men simply never begin the conventional courtship sequence. They bypass the phase of trial and error romantic pursuit entirely, choosing instead to invest those formative years in skill acquisition, asset building, and network development within male centric or neutral spaces. The opportunity cost of dating feels prohibitive when the same hours could compound into marketable expertise or financial independence. This accelerated learning curve manifests in striking statistical divergences. College enrollment among men continues to plummet relative to women, particularly in humanities and social sciences, where credentialing serves primarily as a signaling mechanism for corporate or institutional roles that demand high social compliance. Men gravitate toward STEM subfields with clear private sector payoffs, trade apprenticeships that lead quickly to self employment, or entirely non academic paths such as content creation, drop shipping, software development boot camps, or cryptocurrency and blockchain related ventures. The common thread remains control over one's economic destiny. Credentials that tie individuals to hierarchical bureaucracies lose appeal when those bureaucracies increasingly demand ideological conformity, endless sensitivity training, and performative diversity metrics that many men perceive as hostile to their natural temperament and interests. Instead, they pursue paths where merit can be demonstrated objectively through code repositories, trading performance, audience growth metrics, or client results. These arenas reward output over affiliation, allowing men to sidestep environments saturated with the interpersonal politics that once made workplace advancement exhausting, even before adding romantic expectations. The economic model that emerges from this preference favors extreme flexibility and low fixed costs. A 25-year-old man earning $80,000 annually through freelance development contracts, affiliate marketing, or a niche YouTube channel often lives with lower stress and higher disposable time than a 40-year-old corporate manager clearing double that income but locked into mortgage payments, family provision, and constant availability. The younger man rents modestly, perhaps in a low cost city or even abroad for a part of the year, maintains no car payment if public transit or a bicycle suffices, eats simply but nutritiously, and funnels surplus into index funds, precious metals, or skill enhancing courses. His lifestyle remains deliberately under the radar of consumer culture. Luxury for him means owning his schedule, not owning status objects. This approach creates a widening chasm between male and female economic trajectories. Women who followed the conventional path of advanced degrees, followed by professional employment, frequently carry substantial student debt into their 30s, face upward mobility ceilings in people oriented fields, and encounter housing markets that require dual incomes to access desirable locations. The single income professional woman in a high cost metropolitan area often finds herself working longer hours for less real purchasing power than the strategically minimalist single man operating remotely from a lower cost region. These divergences fuel a growing spatial separation as well. Men increasingly practice what some call geographic arbitrage, moving to places where dollars stretch further, regulations remain lighter, and cultural expectations exert less pressure toward traditional provision. Regions in the American South and Midwest, certain Eastern European countries, parts of Southeast Asia, and even rural pockets within expensive states become magnets for men seeking affordable autonomy. They arrive with portable skills, remote income streams, and no dependence, quickly establishing lives of quiet abundance. Local economies benefit from their spending without bearing the burden of supporting large households. Women attempting similar moves face steeper barriers. Career continuity suffers more severely when networks concentrate in major urban centers. Family ties pull harder when aging parents require proximity. Social judgment remains more intense for women living unconventionally solo in less progressive areas. The result is that men achieve mobility and cost reduction faster, widening the resource gap even further. Biological realities add another irreversible layer to the equation. Male fertility remains robust well into middle age and beyond, with viable sperm production continuing under favorable health conditions. Female fertility follows a steeper curve, with significant decline accelerating after 35 and approaching clinical infertility for most by the mid 40s without medical intervention. Men who delay or forego family formation therefore retain theoretical optionality far longer. Many exercise that optionality by remaining childless indefinitely, finding purpose in other domains. Women who delayed childbearing in pursuit of career peaks or personal exploration now confront compressed decision windows. Egg freezing offers partial insurance for the financially privileged, yet success rates remain moderate. Procedures carry risks, and the financial outlay can exceed six figures when including storage and eventual IVF cycles. For the majority without access to those resources, the biological clock imposes a hard limit that male detachment renders increasingly irrelevant from the male perspective. A man in his 40s or 50s who has built substantial assets and maintains excellent health can still father children with younger partners should he choose, while women in comparable age brackets face exponentially diminishing prospects. This asymmetry intensifies the sense of urgency visible in online pleas for commitment. Yet urgency alone does not restore eroded trust or reverse incentive structures. Cultural feedback loops amplify the separation. As fewer men participate in traditional dating and marriage markets, the remaining participants skew toward outliers. Men with unusually high status or risk tolerance, and women willing to accept non traditional arrangements. Mainstream dating platforms reflect this distortion through skewed gender ratios, inflated female selectivity, and male disengagement. Algorithms prioritize engagement over compatibility, rewarding provocative content and superficial traits while punishing nuanced communication. The experience becomes demoralizing for average participants on both sides, but men exit the platforms in greater numbers because their alternatives, solitude, male friendship, hobby immersion, provide higher subjective returns. Women remain longer, hoping for a statistical outlier, yet prolonged exposure to rejection and ghosting erodes self perception and heightens defensiveness. Public discourse around these trends polarizes quickly. One side frames male withdrawal as immaturity or entitlement. The other views it as rational adaptation to hostile conditions. Neither framing alters underlying incentives. Men continue building lives incompatible with conventional expectations because those lives deliver superior outcomes on the metrics they now prioritize: peace, autonomy, financial sovereignty, and low conflict social environments. Institutions respond sluggishly and ineffectively. Religious organizations that once served as primary matchmaking and community building structures see declining male attendance. Corporate diversity initiatives focus on female advancement but rarely address male disengagement from high commitment career tracks. Government pronatalist measures, baby bonuses, extended parental leave, subsidized childcare, target symptoms without touching root causes. When men perceive family formation as a net liability rather than an asset, financial sweeteners achieve marginal uptake. Cultural campaigns urging men to man up or step up encounter cynicism because they ignore the evidentiary basis for withdrawal. Men have access to decades of data points: divorce initiation rates, custody outcomes, alimony statistics, false accusation prevalence, hypergamy patterns, and shifting cultural valuations of masculinity. Persuasion that contradicts lived and observed reality fails. The conversation moves underground into spaces where men reinforce one another's conclusions without external moderation. This underground reinforcement creates resilience against mainstream pressure. Male only or male majority communities develop their own norms, language, and value hierarchies. Concepts such as frame control, outcome independence, abundance mentality, and mission focus become shorthand for psychological strategies that protect against manipulation or emotional dependency. Physical discipline receives near universal emphasis because strength provides both practical security and psychological confidence. Financial discipline follows closely, with emphasis on owning productive assets rather than consuming status symbols. These norms prove self reinforcing. A man surrounded by others who live similarly experiences social proof that his choices are not deviant, but adaptive. The community becomes a substitute for the familial and romantic structures he opted out of, offering camaraderie without obligation, competition without malice, and mutual advancement without exploitation. Looking further ahead, the cumulative effect points toward a bifurcated social order. One segment consists of men living deliberately low entanglement lives, clustered in flexible subcultures, sustaining themselves through portable competence and minimal consumption. Another segment comprises women and the minority of men still participating in traditional relational and economic structures, contending with increasing strain as resources concentrate asymmetrically. Interactions between segments grow more transactional. Professional services, brief commercial exchanges, occasional civic necessities, emotional and reproductive bridges narrow to near zero for large portions of the population. Birth rates stabilize at sub-replacement levels or continue declining, accelerating reliance on automation, immigration, and extended working lifespans to maintain economic function. Cultural output reflects the split. Media, aimed at male audiences, emphasizes self mastery, stoic endurance, and rejection of external validation. Content targeting female audiences cycles between empowerment rhetoric and lamentations over missing partnership. The process carries no dramatic turning point, only steady compounding. Each year, more men cross the threshold into full detachment. Each year, more women confront the consequences of eroded optionality. Neither side possesses a mechanism strong enough to reverse the momentum without fundamental changes to incentives, legal frameworks, cultural narratives, and biological realities, all of which appear locked in their current configuration. Men, having secured their peace through withdrawal, see no reason to re enter the arena. Their contentment rests on independence, not on societal approval or relational success. That foundation proves durable because it requires nothing from the external world beyond basic non interference. The momentum of male detachment has now solidified into structural patterns that resist easy disruption. Legal systems, once viewed primarily as neutral arbiters of disputes, stand exposed as mechanisms that disproportionately penalize male investment in family and partnership. High profile cases continue to circulate in which men lose half or more of accumulated wealth despite decades of primary earning responsibility, face ongoing financial obligations long after relationships end, and encounter custody arrangements that limit meaningful parental involvement to sporadic visitation. These outcomes occur not as rare anomalies, but as predictable statistical regularities. Young men absorb this information early and comprehensively. They understand that entering marriage or cohabitation under current family law frameworks means signing a contract where the exit clauses favor one party overwhelmingly. The rational response becomes avoidance rather than negotiation. Prenuptial agreements offer partial protection, yet courts in many jurisdictions scrutinize and sometimes invalidate them when deemed unfair or when circumstances change significantly. Cohabitation agreements face similar vulnerabilities. The safest legal position remains no legal entanglement at all. Men therefore structure their lives to minimize exposure. Separate finances, no joint property, no shared leases, no children born into legally binding arrangements. This precautionary architecture becomes second nature. Financial architecture follows suit. Men increasingly favor assets that resist easy division or seizure. Cryptocurrency held in self custodied wallets, precious metals stored privately, offshore accounts where permissible, and business entities structured as sole proprietorships or LLCs with minimal personal guarantees create layers of separation between personal wealth and potential claims. Traditional retirement accounts and employer sponsored plans lose appeal when they remain visible and accessible in legal proceedings. Cash flow businesses operated remotely generate income that can be directed through multiple channels, complicating tracing efforts. The philosophy guiding these choices emphasizes sovereignty over accumulation for its own sake. Wealth serves freedom, not status or provision. A man with $200,000 in diversified, hard to reach assets often feels more secure than one with 2 million tied up in jointly titled real estate and retirement funds. The former retains optionality, the latter remains vulnerable to external claims. This mindset spreads rapidly because success stories proliferate in private networks. Men share templates for asset protection, tax minimization within legal bounds, and income diversification that preserve autonomy even during economic turbulence. Health and physical conditioning receive parallel emphasis as non negotiable pillars of independence. Men recognize that bodily resilience provides the ultimate insurance policy against future instability. Gym routines shift from aesthetics toward functional strength, mobility, and metabolic health. Compound lifts, zone 2 cardio, grip training, and flexibility work become standard because they support longevity and capability. Nutrition focuses on satiety, nutrient density, and hormonal optimization rather than restriction for appearance alone. Sleep hygiene, stress management through breathwork or meditation, and avoidance of endocrine disruptors gain near religious adherence. The goal remains simple: maintain peak physical and mental performance into the 50s, 60s, and beyond without reliance on medical intervention or external caretakers. A man who can deadlift twice his body weight, run 10 kilometers comfortably, and recover quickly from illness possesses leverage that no amount of financial provision can replicate in relational contexts. This physical sovereignty reinforces psychological sovereignty. When the body functions optimally, confidence in solitary decision making strengthens. Dependence on others diminishes because basic survival and comfort no longer require assistance. Social structures adapt accordingly. Male friendships evolve into primary support networks, replacing the emotional labor once outsourced to romantic partners. Regular meetups, group training sessions, accountability calls, and shared projects create bonds based on mutual respect and reciprocal value rather than obligation. These connections prove more durable because they lack the volatility introduced by sexual dynamics or unequal domestic contributions. Conversations center on strategy, philosophy, technical challenges, and personal progress rather than relational grievances. When conflicts arise, resolution occurs through direct communication or temporary distance rather than prolonged negotiation or third party mediation. The absence of female influence in these spaces allows unfiltered expression of ambition, frustration, humor, and vulnerability without fear of judgment or weaponization. Many men report deeper authenticity in these interactions than they ever experienced in mixed gender settings. The network becomes a substitute family of choice, providing belonging without the legal or financial string to learnings attached to biological or marital families. Women observing or experiencing these developments from the outside frequently attempt re entry strategies that misunderstand the changed landscape. Social media campaigns encouraging men to return to dating or marriage often employ guilt, nostalgia, or appeals to biological imperatives. Messages circulate claiming that men will regret childlessness in old age, that solitude leads to loneliness rather than peace, or that societal collapse will force men back into protective roles. These arguments fail to gain traction because they contradict accumulated evidence. Men have tested solitude extensively and found it superior on multiple dimensions. They have modeled long term outcomes through observation of older men who walked away decades earlier and now live with contentment, mobility, and financial security. Appeals to regret ring hollow when present reality delivers satisfaction. Nostalgia for traditional roles ignores the intervening history of betrayal, legal hazard, and cultural hostility. Biological arguments carry limited weight when men retain fertility optionality far longer, and many choose legacy through mentorship, creative output, or community contribution rather than direct reproduction. The disconnect widens. Women double down on selectivity criteria, while men double down on non participation. Economic feedback loops accelerate the separation. As men reduce taxable income and consumer spending tied to family units, governments face mounting pressure on budgets already strained by aging populations and entitlement commitments. Attempts to extract more revenue through higher rates on remaining high earners encounter resistance in the form of further withdrawal, relocation, or income restructuring. Public services degrade incrementally. Longer wait times for healthcare, reduced infrastructure maintenance, fewer police and emergency responders per capita, strained educational resources. Women who statistically rely more heavily on these services for childcare, elder care, healthcare access, and income support feel the deterioration most acutely. Single professional women in urban centers watch disposable income evaporate under combined taxes, housing costs, and service fees, while male peers in lower cost regions or remote setups retain surplus. The asymmetry becomes visible in lifestyle contrasts. One group maintains travel freedom, hobby investment, and emergency buffers. The other grapples with paycheck to paycheck tension despite full time employment. Public resentment builds, yet it directs toward abstract systems rather than individual choices. Men remain largely insulated because their footprint stays small and their dependencies minimal. Technological developments reinforce male advantages in this environment. Automation and artificial intelligence continue displacing routine cognitive and administrative labor, fields where women hold disproportionate representation. Men who pivoted early into technical creation, building tools, training models, designing systems, capture value at the point of innovation rather than execution. Remote work normalization allows geographic flexibility that women in client facing or institutional roles struggle to match. Decentralized finance and blockchain based systems provide additional avenues for wealth preservation outside traditional banking oversight. Peer to peer platforms for skill exchange reduce reliance on corporate employment. These tools lower barriers to entry for self directed men while offering fewer parallel advantages to women whose career capital remains concentrated in legacy institutional structures. The technological tide lifts those already positioned for autonomy and leaves others treading water. Cultural memory begins to shift as well. Younger cohorts grow up in environments where male disengagement constitutes the norm rather than the exception. Boys witness fathers, older brothers, and uncles living solitary, purposeful lives without apparent deprivation. The absence of constant relational drama registers as stability rather than loss. Media, aimed at young males, emphasizes self reliance, technical mastery, physical discipline, and rejection of external validation. Influencers who model traditional provider roles lose relevance when their lifestyles appear outdated or high risk. Narratives celebrating lifelong bachelorhood or selective partnership gain cultural legitimacy. Women, attempting to counter these trends, face uphill battles against lived experience. Appeals to partnership as inherently fulfilling collide with visible evidence of its costs. The generational handoff accelerates the entrenchment of detachment as default male strategy. Long range projections indicate continued polarization. One population segment ages into resource rich, low obligation independence. Another confronts mounting scarcity in relational, economic, and institutional domains. Cross pollination diminishes to near zero outside necessity. Reproductive patterns stabilize at levels requiring sustained immigration or radical policy intervention to maintain workforce ratios. Innovation concentrates among those with surplus time and energy, predominantly detached men, while consumption driven sectors contract. Social cohesion frays as trust erodes across gender lines and institutional legitimacy wanes. The system persists through inertia and adaptation rather than restoration of prior equilibria. Men positioned within this framework express no nostalgia for what was lost, because what replaced it delivers greater net utility. Peace remains the ultimate metric, measured in freedom from coercion, predictability of outcomes, and alignment between effort and reward. That peace proves self sustaining, requiring nothing from the broader society beyond space to exist undisturbed. The detachment, once reactive, has become proactive architecture for enduring whatever emerges next. The architecture of male detachment has matured into a comprehensive life philosophy that permeates every decision layer, from daily routines to multi decade planning. Men now treat existence as a deliberate engineering project where every input serves the output of sustained autonomy. Morning hours, once consumed by commuting or preparing to meet external expectations, transform into blocks reserved for personal protocol. Cold exposure, followed by resistance training, deliberate sunlight exposure to regulate circadian rhythms, consumption of nutrient dense meals optimized for cognitive performance and hormonal stability, then deep work sessions on income generating activities that require zero supervision. These routines eliminate decision fatigue by becoming automatic. No negotiation over breakfast choices, no compromise on training intensity to accommodate someone else's schedule, no energy drain from anticipating evening conflicts. The day belongs entirely to the architect. Afternoon and evening slots fill with skill refinement, market analysis, creative experimentation, or restorative activities like reading dense philosophical texts, practicing musical instruments, or exploring technical documentation for emerging technologies. The structure feels monastic in its discipline, yet luxurious in its freedom. Men report that this rhythm produces a steady state euphoria absent in previous lifestyles saturated with compromise. This engineered existence extends to environmental design. Living spaces shrink intentionally to match actual needs rather than projected family requirements. A one-bedroom apartment or small house in a low regulation area suffices when possessions fit into a few modular storage units. Furniture prioritizes function: standing desk, ergonomic chair, quality mattress, minimal kitchen setup for batch cooking, dedicated training corner with pull up bar and kettlebells. Decorations remain sparse. Perhaps a single piece of art chosen for personal residence or shelves holding books that shaped worldview. The absence of excess creates mental clarity. No visual noise from unused children's toys, no clutter from accumulated gifts or seasonal decorations, no maintenance burden from large square footage. Utility bills drop dramatically. Property taxes stay manageable. Insurance costs reflect actual risk rather than inflated household coverage. The financial savings compound quietly while the psychological benefit manifests as constant background peace. Men describe the sensation as living inside their own nervous system rather than constantly monitoring an external ecosystem. Risk management evolves into an art form. Men conduct ongoing threat assessments across multiple vectors: financial volatility, health decline, legal exposure, reputational attack, geopolitical instability. Each vector receives proactive countermeasures. Emergency funds cover 24 to 36 months of lean expenses held in diversified liquid and semi liquid forms. Multiple passports or residency applications in stable jurisdictions serve as exit options should domestic conditions deteriorate. Health monitoring includes regular blood work panels tracking biomarkers of aging, inflammation markers, hormone profiles, and micronutrient status. Preventive protocols incorporate evidence based supplementation, periodic fasting regimens, and advanced diagnostics when warranted. Digital security hardens through hardware wallets, encrypted communications, pseudonymous online presence, and minimal social media footprints that reveal personal details. Reputation defense involves maintaining clean public records, avoiding controversial public stances that could trigger coordinated attacks, and cultivating offline networks that value discretion. The cumulative effect creates anti fragility. Stressors that once threatened collapse now become data points for refinement. Intellectual development receives equal rigor. Men devour material that previous generations dismissed as esoteric or impractical. Works on evolutionary psychology, game theory, behavioral economics, military history, systems thinking, and classical philosophy form the core curriculum. Reading lists circulate in private channels, often annotated with practical applications to modern contexts. Discussions within trusted circles dissect concepts like principal agent problems in relationships, zero sum versus positive sum dynamics in resource allocation, or the tragedy of the commons as it applies to public trust and institutional decay. These explorations sharpen pattern recognition. Men spot incentive misalignments faster, predict downstream consequences of policy shifts, and calibrate personal strategy accordingly. The knowledge compounds into strategic foresight that renders mainstream narratives transparent. Promises of societal renewal through political change or cultural awakening register as cope when historical cycles demonstrate otherwise. Detachment, therefore, becomes not just practical, but philosophically inevitable. Well, and to women confronting this fortified posture encounter barriers that grow taller with time. Attempts to reframe the narrative, claiming men fear strong women, suffer from porn addiction, or chase unattainable youth, bounce off accumulated counter evidence. Men have tested proximity to high achieving women and found the same patterns of entitlement, emotional volatility, and post commitment behavioral reversion that appear across socioeconomic strata. They have observed that strength in career or intellect rarely correlates with relational generosity or conflict de escalation skills. The data points accumulate stories of female executives who demand traditional provision while contributing minimally to household labor, professional women who initiate separation when better prospects emerge, educated women who weaponize institutional mechanisms against partners. Each anecdote reinforces the conclusion that character traits relevant to partnership operate independently of status markers. Selectivity, therefore, intensifies on the male side. Compatibility checklists expand beyond income and appearance to include demonstrated loyalty history, emotional regulation under pressure, absence of litigious tendencies, and genuine appreciation for male space rather than tolerance of it. Few women meet the full criteria because the criteria derive from observed failure modes rather than idealized fantasies. Public attempts to shame or legislate men back into participation encounter diminishing returns. Campaigns labeling detachment as toxic masculinity or selfish individualism generate backlash within male spaces but little behavioral change. Proposed legal reforms, capping alimony duration, presumptive 50/50th custody, penalties for false allegations, face entrenched opposition from advocacy groups and judicial inertia. Even when incremental changes pass, trust remains shattered. Men who watched decades of precedent see reform as too little, too late. They continue structuring lives to render legal exposure irrelevant. Marriage rates among younger cohorts stabilize at historic lows. Cohabitation without legal entanglements becomes rare because even informal arrangements trigger common law presumptions in many jurisdictions. The default remains parallel existence with minimal intersection. Economic ecosystems begin fragmenting along these lines. Parallel markets emerge for male centric goods and services. Minimalist gear, nootropic formulations, advanced training equipment, privacy focused tech, offshore banking consultancies, digital nomad visa guidance, female oriented markets contract in categories reliant on dual income purchasing power, luxury family vehicles, large suburban homes, wedding industries, premium baby products. Retail chains that once thrived on household consumption pivot towards single person convenience or downsize footprints. Commercial real estate in family heavy suburbs softens while demand rises for micro units and co living spaces tailored to solo professionals. Though, even here, gender skews appear, with men favoring true independence over shared arrangements. Tourism patterns shift. Adventure travel, solo expeditions, and skill based retreats grow among men, while women cluster in group wellness trips or destination events seeking social reconnection. Demographic mathematics tighten the vice. Each successive year of sub-replacement fertility compounds population aging. Workforce participation ratios tilt further toward necessity-driven female labor while voluntary male exit accelerates. Pension systems approach insolvency thresholds earlier than projected. Healthcare demand surges for chronic conditions prevalent in older cohorts while supply of younger caregivers shrinks. Immigration fills gaps temporarily but introduces cultural and economic frictions that further erode social cohesion. Governments experiment with universal basic income pilots, automation taxes, and mandatory national service schemes, yet none address the core motivational collapse among men. Incentives remain misaligned. Provision without guaranteed reciprocity continues to appear as negative expected value. The system limps forward through debt accumulation and productivity extraction from remaining participants until tipping points arrive. Men positioned outside the primary stress nodes observe these developments with clinical detachment. They maintain contingency plans for various collapse vectors, localized economic contraction, supply chain breakdowns, civil unrest, currency devaluation, energy shortages. Preparations include redundant food storage, water purification capacity, alternative power sources, defensive training, barter networks, and geographic mobility options. The mindset resembles that of early adopters in any paradigm shift, quiet accumulation of capability while the mainstream remains anchored to outdated assumptions. When disruptions materialize, the prepared segment weathers them with minimal degradation while others scramble. The advantage stems not from superior resources, but from lower dependencies and higher adaptability. This preparedness extends to existential questions. Men confront mortality without the buffer of lineage continuation or spousal caretaking. Legacy redefines itself through intellectual contribution, mentorship of younger men, creation of durable tools or knowledge repositories, or simply living as exemplars of disciplined freedom. The absence of children loses its sting when purpose derives from mastery and impact rather than biological immortality. Aging brings physical decline, yet also accumulated wisdom, financial security, and freedom from the anxieties that plague provider roles. Many report that the 50s and 60s become peak decades precisely because obligations remain minimal while capability peaks through consistent discipline. The trajectory points toward dignified, self directed decline rather than dependence or resentment. The overall arc suggests a slow motion reordering of civilization around reduced relational interdependence. Societies persist, but in leaner, more atomized configurations. Trust concentrates within tight circles of proven value alignment. Cross gender cooperation limits itself to mutually beneficial transactions. Reproductive continuity relies increasingly on intentional, contractual arrangements among small minorities who still prioritize family formation. The majority adapts to permanent singlehood as the statistical norm. Cultural output reflects this reality. Art and entertainment explore themes of solitary resilience, technological transcendence, philosophical acceptance, and rejection of inherited scripts. The human story continues, but the chapter defined by universal partnership closes quietly. The culmination of these patterns points toward a future where human organization reverts to more primitive, decentralized forms of survival and meaning making, stripped of the elaborate relational scaffolding that defined industrial and post industrial eras. Men who have engineered their detachment now function as nodes in loose, voluntary networks rather than as cogs in family or corporate hierarchies. These networks operate on principles of mutual utility, reciprocal respect, and zero entitlement. A man might collaborate on a software project with three others scattered across continents, splitting revenue cleanly through smart contracts, never meeting in person, never owing emotional labor. Another might join a rotating crew for seasonal land projects, building off grid cabins, restoring degraded soil, harvesting timber, where contribution determines status and no one expects lifelong commitment. These arrangements prove more stable than traditional families because they dissolve cleanly when value exchange ceases, without courts, alimony, or custody battles. Trust builds slowly through demonstrated competence rather than declared affection. Betrayal carries natural consequences, exclusion from future opportunities rather than legal punishment. The system self corrects through reputation markets that operate informally but ruthlessly. A man who flakes, overpromises, or attempts exploitation finds his access to resources and collaborators evaporate overnight. This model scales unevenly across domains. In digital realms, it thrives because barriers to entry remain low and verification occurs through transparent output. Open source repositories, decentralized autonomous organizations, peer to peer marketplaces, and blockchain based identity systems allow men to build wealth and influence while remaining pseudonymous or minimally exposed. Physical domains present greater friction yet still yield to adaptation. Makerspaces, private shooting ranges, wilderness training compounds, and informal trade guilds serve as anchors for men who value tangible skill over abstract credentials. These locations foster hierarchies based on demonstrated ability. The welder who fabricates flawless parts, the tracker who locates game undetected, the medic who stabilizes trauma efficiently. Status flows from utility, not from negotiation or inheritance. Women rarely penetrate these spaces because entry requires years of deliberate practice in fields historically male dominated and currently male abandoned. When women do appear, they often encounter unspoken standards that prioritize results over inclusion. The dynamic discourages casual participation and reinforces separation. Economic flows within these networks bypass legacy institutions to an increasing degree. Barter revives in sophisticated forms, trading custom code for machining services, trading land use rights for security consulting, trading rare earth salvage for medical supplies. Cryptocurrencies and stablecoins facilitate cross border value transfer without intermediary seizure risk. Men accumulate physical assets, tools, land parcels in defensible locations, seed banks, water rights that appreciate in chaotic environments while fiat currency depreciates. The strategy resembles pre modern merchant guilds more than modern wage labor. Wealth concentrates among those who mastered early positioning, men who bought rural acreage before prices spiked, who stockpiled equipment before supply chains fractured, who built audience followings before platform censorship tightened. Late entrants face steeper curves, yet still find niches through specialization. A man who becomes unmatched in drone repair, rainwater harvesting design, or encrypted communication setup carves out durable relevance regardless of broader collapse. Women navigating this landscape encounter compounded disadvantages. Legacy career paths erode under automation and institutional downsizing. Service sector jobs that once offered stability, teaching, nursing, administration, face wage compression, and replacement by AI assisted workflows. Gig platforms that promise flexibility deliver algorithmic exploitation, constant rating pressure, deactivation risk, race to the bottom pricing. Attempts to enter male dominated alternative economies meet resistance rooted in both practical and protective instincts. Men guard these spaces because they represent hard won sanctuaries from prior exploitation. A woman seeking entry must overcome skepticism built on decades of observed pattern breaks. Initial enthusiasm followed by withdrawal when demands increase, claims of discrimination when standards remain uniform, or weaponization of institutional mechanisms when interpersonal friction arises. The entry cost becomes prohibitive. Most women, therefore, remain tethered to shrinking mainstream structures, government employment where possible, corporate roles with declining real compensation, or entrepreneurial ventures in saturated female oriented markets. Reproductive dynamics reach terminal asymmetry. Men who desire children increasingly pursue contractual arrangements while surrogacy in permissive jurisdictions, co parenting agreements with clear exit clauses, or adoption through streamlined international channels. These paths allow paternity without marital entanglement or ongoing financial exposure beyond agreed terms. Biological mothers in these scenarios often accept the conditions because traditional partner options have evaporated. The resulting children grow up in unconventional households, primary male care with rotating female involvement, or intentional multi adult configurations designed for stability rather than romance. Cultural normalization of these models proceeds slowly but steadily among detached populations. Traditional nuclear family nostalgia retains emotional pull yet loses practical relevance when statistical evidence shows higher dysfunction rates in conventional arrangements under current incentives. Institutional legitimacy continues eroding. Electoral participation among men drops to historic lows as faith in representational outcomes collapses. Taxation without representation feels more literal when revenue funds programs perceived as extractive rather than reciprocal. Compliance strategies shift toward minimization, structuring income below visibility thresholds, relocating to low enforcement jurisdictions, operating cash based microeconomies. Public infrastructure decays visibly. Potholed roads, intermittent utilities, overburdened emergency services, while private alternatives proliferate among prepared segments. Gated communities evolve into fortified hamlets with their own power generation, water treatment, security rotations, and dispute resolution mechanisms. These micropolities operate on consensus among proven contributors, excluding those who bring net liability. The pattern echoes medieval city state formation more than modern nation state governance, and cultural production mirrors the fracture. Independent creators targeting male audiences produce long form content exploring self mastery, historical cycles of civilizational rise and fall, technological singularity prospects, and stoic acceptance of entropy. Production values remain high through pooled resources and distributed talent. Platforms migrate toward censorship resistant protocols, decentralized video hosting, encrypted text channels, mesh networks for local dissemination, female targeted content cycles between aspirational individualism and collective grievance, yet reach diminishes as purchasing power concentrates elsewhere. Mainstream media consolidates into propaganda organs for remaining institutional interests, losing audience share to parallel ecosystems. Art forms evolve accordingly. Music celebrating solitude and discipline, visual works depicting stark landscapes and solitary figures, literature dissecting incentive collapse without romantic framing. Psychological adaptation completes the circle. Men who once experienced withdrawal as reaction now inhabit detachment as natural state. The absence of relational turbulence registers as baseline normalcy rather than deprivation. Emotional range narrows toward steady contentment, punctuated by bursts of achievement driven satisfaction. Romantic or sexual impulses receive pragmatic handling. Transactional encounters, when desired, voluntary celibacy when not, without the obsessive framing that once dominated male experience. Identity anchors in internal metrics, strength gained, knowledge mastered, systems built, risks mitigated. External validation loses potency because internal reference points prove more reliable and less manipulable. Aging men mentor younger ones not out of obligation, but because transmitting competence secures legacy without biological dependence. The transmission occurs through direct demonstration rather than abstract preaching. A younger man watches an older one troubleshoot a failing generator in pouring rain, replace a blown inverter at 3 in the morning, or negotiate resource access with wary locals, and the lesson embeds deeper than any lecture. The final horizon reveals parallel human ecologies occupying the same geography, yet rarely intersecting. One ecology operates at minimal footprint, high resilience, voluntary association, and internal purpose. The other clings to legacy expectations, institutional dependence, relational hope, and external grievance. Bridges between them narrow to rare transactional points: medical exchange, technical service, occasional resource trade. Conflict remains low because the detached segment poses no direct threat and seeks no conquest. Friction arises only when resource scarcity forces proximity: water rights disputes, land use competition, emergency overlap. But even then, resolution favors those with greater preparation and lower desperation. The detached ecology endures because its members require little from the world beyond non interference. The legacy ecology struggles because its members require constant inputs that grow scarcer. In this bifurcated reality, the human experiment continues under altered terms. Meaning derives from chosen discipline rather than assigned roles. Survival favors adaptability over entitlement. Legacy forms through contribution to resilient systems rather than through progeny or institutional position. The arc traces back toward patterns seen in earlier civilizational contractions: pockets of competence preserving knowledge and capability while broader structures fragment. Yet technology adds a wild card. If artificial general intelligence emerges under decentralized control, detached men stand positioned to harness it for exponential personal leverage. If it consolidates under legacy institutions, the asymmetry deepens further. Either outcome reinforces the core truth: men who walked away built lives that withstand entropy, while those who remained tethered face its full force. The story closes not with triumph or tragedy, but with quiet inevitability. Men discovered that solitude, when fortified with discipline and foresight, delivers a form of flourishing unavailable in traditional configurations. They chose it not out of hatred or fear, but out of measured calculation. The calculation held, the choice proved correct. The world adjusted around their absence. And in that adjustment lies the final lesson. When one half of the equation withdraws its cooperation, the remaining half must either evolve or dissolve. Evolution occurred for some, dissolution awaits the rest. 2. The 1 hour gang who made it through the entire journey, absolute respect for staying locked in from the opening hook to this final word. If these angry guy marathons have sharpened your lens and given you the unfiltered map of where things stand, consider fueling the next one by grabbing me a Red Bull through the link in the description. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. After everything laid out here, where do you see yourself fitting in this emerging split? Do you think the detached path offers the only realistic long-term play, or do you hold out for some unforeseen reset? Share what hit hardest across the whole arc and what you plan to do with the clarity. Like the video if the full breakdown delivered. Do not forget to subscribe so you catch every future deep dive. And if this series moved the needle for you, share it with others who need to see the complete picture. Just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.